Folks, this is question number 151 of the series. You have an Azure subscription named Sub1 that contains the resources shown in the following table. Your table shows three resources named MG1, which is management group type, RG1, which is resource group type, and VM1, which is virtual machine type. You create a user named admin1. To what can you add admin1 as a co-administrator? Your options are RG1, MG1, Sub1, or VM1. Now, co-administrator can only be assigned at subscription scope. So the correct answer here is option C, Sub1. Question number 152 of the series. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant that contains the groups shown in the following table. The table has four groups named Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, and Group 4, out of which the Group 1 and Group 2 are security type, whereas Group 3 and Group 4 are Microsoft 365 groups. And then the license assigned thing is Group 1 and Group 3 have a license assigned, and Group 2 and 4 do not have a license assigned. Now the tenant contains the users shown in the following table. Again, there are four users named user 1, user 2, user 3, and user 4, out of which user 1 and user 4 are not members of any group, whereas user 2 is member of group 1 and user 3 is member of group 4. Again, there is a talk about license assignment. User 1 and user 3 have a license assigned, whereas user 2 and user 4 do not have a license assigned. So folks, let's now look at the questions. Which user and groups can you delete? For users, the options are user 4 only, user 1 and user 4 only, user 2 and user 4 only, user 1, 2, 3, and 4, which means all users. And folks, you can delete all users whether a license is assigned directly or via inheritance from a group membership. So in this case, last option is correct. Now, when it comes to groups, the options are group 2 only, group 2 and group 3 only, group 2 and group 4 only, and then all groups. Groups with active license assignment cannot be deleted unlike users. So you will get an error if you try to delete them. And in this case, therefore, the correct answer is option 3, group 2 and group 4 only, because they did not have any license assigned. Let's look at next question. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant. You plan to delete multiple users by using bulk delete in the Entra Admin Center. You need to create and upload a file for the bulk delete. Which user attributes should you include in the file? Your options are the user principal name and usage location of each user only, the user principal name of each user only, the display name of each user only, the display name and usage location of each user only, the display name and user principal name of each user only. The only required value is user principal name when performing a bulk delete from Entra Admin Center. So the correct answer is the user principal name of each user only, which is option B. So folks, you can see this is a official page from Microsoft, which is guiding you through the process of bulk deletion of users in Microsoft Entra ID. So let's look at this page to confirm the validity of the answer. And when you scroll down through the steps, you can see step 5 says open the CSV file and add a line for each user you want to delete. The only required value is user principal name and then save the file. This validates the chosen answer that the only required field is user principal name. Question number 154 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named test-rg. You use test-rg to validate an Azure deployment. Test-rg contains the following resources. Again, there are three resources named VM1, Vault1, and VNet1. VM1 is a virtual machine, Vault1 is a recovery services vault, and VNet1 is a virtual network type. And then there is a description for VM1. It basically says VM1 is running and configured to backup to Vault1 daily. So folks, in the description, basically they are telling you what is the purpose of VM1, how it is backed up, and what is the current state. Then for Vault 1, it says Vault 1 includes all backups of VM1. Obviously in VM1, it was said that the VM is configured to backup on Vault 1 daily, and Vault 1 includes all the backups of VM1. VNet 1 has a resource lock of type delete. Now you need to delete test RG. What should you do first? Options are modify the backup configurations of VM1 and modify the resource lock type of VNet 1. Remove the resource lock from VNet 1 and delete all data in Vault 1. Turn off VM1 and remove the resource lock from VNet 1. Turn off VM1 and delete all data in Vault 1. Friends, to answer this question, first thing that you should know is when you delete a resource group, all of its resources are deleted. And this resource group has a virtual network which has a delete lock. So if you try to delete resource group, it will fail due to this reason. So therefore, you first need to remove the resource lock from VNet 1. And you should also know that you cannot delete Vault that contains backup data. So before you attempt to delete test RG1, you need to remove the resource lock from VNet 1 and delete all data in Vault 1, which is option B. Friends, I hope you now understand why option B has been chosen as the correct choice here. But if you have any doubts, please post them in the comment section and I'll address them as soon as possible. Before we proceed forward, folks, there are a lot of questions now in the series, and if it is becoming a bit tiring for you to watch through the videos, and if you are looking to gain access to PDF version of all the videos being uploaded on the channel, do not forget to join the channel at gold tier and send me an email at devopshub2023@gmail.com to request the PDF copy. This is question number 155. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resources shown in the following table. Here you have two resources which are named as VM1 and storage 1 of virtual machine and storage account type. VM1 is hosted in East US location, whereas the storage 1 is hosted in West US location. You need to ensure that data transfers between storage 1 and VM1 do not traverse the internet. What should you configure for storage 1? Your options are data protection, a private endpoint, public network access in the firewalls and virtual network settings, a shared access signature, which is SAS. To ensure that all the traffic from VM1 to storage 1 travels across the Microsoft backbone network without going out to the public network, you should use private endpoint. So folks, let's now again look at the Microsoft documentation to confirm the validity of the answer. I am on the link which is there on the video on your screen as well now. You can see you can use private endpoints for your Azure storage accounts to allow clients on a virtual network to securely access data over a private link. The private endpoint uses a separate IP address from the VNet address space for each storage account service. Network traffic between the clients on the VNet and the storage account traverses over the VNet and a private link on the Microsoft backbone network, eliminating exposure from the public internet. Folks, I hope now you understand why private endpoint was chosen as a correct answer in this case. This is question number 156 of the series. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to create a role definition to meet the following requirements, and your requirements are: users must be able to view the configuration data of a storage account. Users must be able to perform all actions on a virtual network. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. What should you include in the role definition for each of the below mentioned requirements? Again, the first requirement is perform all actions on a virtual network, and the three options are Microsoft.network/virtual network/star, Microsoft.network/virtual network/delete, Microsoft.network/virtual network/write. First option includes a star asterisk at the end, which means it will give all access, and that's what is needed here, making it the correct choice. This permission grants user the ability to perform all operations on a virtual network, including creating, updating, deleting, and viewing. Now the next requirement was view the configuration data of a storage account. And your options are Microsoft.storage/storage account/star, Microsoft.storage/storage account/read, Microsoft.storage/storage account/blob services/containers/blob/read. The requirement is view the configuration data of a storage account. And you also need to fulfill the requirement that the solution must use the principle of least privilege. So for this requirement, you should include second option in the role definition, which is Microsoft.storage/storage account/read. If you would have included first option, it would have still fulfilled the requirement, because if you are giving all the permission, you are obviously giving it the permission to view the configuration data of a storage account. But one of the main requirement which is mentioned at the top of the page is solution must use the principle of least privileges. That is the reason we have chosen second option here. This permission allows users to view the properties and configuration data of a storage account without granting them permissions to modify or delete the storage account. Next question. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1 and an Azure key vault named Vault1. On VM1, you plan to configure Azure disk encryption to use a key encryption key. You need to prepare Vault1 for Azure disk encryption. Which two actions should you perform on Vault1? And your options are select Azure virtual machines for deployment, create a new key, create a new secret, configure a key rotation policy, select Azure disk encryption for volume encryption. And folks, the correct answers here are create a new key and select Azure disk encryption for volume encryption. Folks, let's again look at this official Microsoft page, which tells you to create and configure a key vault for Azure disk encryption on Windows VM to validate the correctness of the answers chosen. So as you can see here, it is said you may also, if you wish, generate or import a key encryption key. That is why option B has been chosen as the correct answer. And now let's scroll further and see the validity of the other chosen options. Now you can see in this steps under enable access to select the box labeled Azure disk encryption for volume encryption, which is option E. Now, folks, the interesting thing here is it says select Azure virtual machine for deployment and or Azure resource manager for template deployment if needed. This option is there in the options, but it is an optional field. As you can see, it is mentioned if needed. That is the reason why I have not chosen option A in the correct list of options. And if we scroll down, let's confirm why configure a key rotation policy is not really needed. Okay, so here you can see in the Azure disk encryption and auto rotation, it says although Azure Key Vault now has key auto rotation, it isn't currently compatible with Azure disk encryption. Specifically, Azure disk encryption will continue to use the original encryption key even after it has been auto rotated. That pretty much confirms that configuring a key rotation policy is not really needed. Even if you configure, it is going to use the original encryption key. However, if you are rotating an encryption key, you need to be aware that you can't disable the old encryption key because Azure disk encryption is still using it. If you disable it, your Azure disk encryption will break. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named Storage1. You need to configure a shared access signature to ensure that users can only download blobs securely by name. Which two settings should you configure? To answer, select the appropriate settings below, and you have a screenshot in which you need to select the settings which you will choose when you need to ensure that users can only download blobs securely by name. Now, in the allowed resource type, you will need to select service if you want to access all blobs within the container. However, in this case, you just need to access them by name. So you will select object whenever you want to access specific blob by name, you need to select object. Then in the allowed permissions, you need to select read, as that allows you to download the objects. Question number 159. You need to select an Azure storage account named storage1. The solution must meet the following requirements, and you have three requirements, which are support Azure Data Lake Storage, minimize cost for infrequently accessed data, automatically replicate data to a secondary Azure region. Which three options should you configure for storage1? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. In this question, you need to choose three options and satisfy three requirements. So most likely each requirement will give you one correct choice. Now the first one is support Azure Data Lake Storage. And for that, your storage account needs to have a hierarchical namespace. Now the next requirement is minimize cost of infrequently accessed data, and for that you will use cool access tier. And the third and final requirement is automatically replicate data to a secondary Azure region, which is supported by GRS, which is geo-redundant storage, as it replicates data to a secondary Azure region, providing data redundancy and disaster recovery capabilities. So the correct answers are, folks, option B, C, and E to accomplish the given requirement. Question number 160. You have an Azure subscription that contains the devices shown in the following table, and now you have 4 devices named device 1, device 2, device 3, and device 4, and the platform for all devices is different. Device 1 is Windows based, device 2 is Ubuntu Linux based, device 3 is Mac OS, and device 4 is Android. On which devices can you install Azure Storage Explorer? Your options are pretty much: first one is device 1 only, second one is device 1 and 2, then the third one is device 1 and 3, fourth one is device 1, 2, and 3, and the fifth one is device 1, 3, and 4. And folks, the correct answer here is option D, device 1, 2, and 3 only. And to understand why we have chosen these options, let's head to the Microsoft official documentation. Folks, this is official Microsoft documentation page to get started with Storage Explorer. And in the overview section, you can see Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer is a standalone app that makes it easy to work with Azure storage data on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. The reason why device 4 is not a valid choice because it was an Android-based device, whereas device 1, 2, and 3 were on a supported OS version. That's why they were chosen as the correct choice. This is question number 161. You have an Azure storage account named storage1 that contains 2 containers named container1 and container2. Blob versioning is enabled for both containers, and you periodically take blob snapshots of critical blobs. You create the following lifecycle management policy, and now you have a ARM template screenshot in which basically it says the rule is enabled, its name is rule 1, and its type is lifecycle. Now there are some actions defined on version in which tier 2 tool says days after creation greater than 15. So basically the blob would be moved to versions would be moved to cool tier after 15 days from creation. Similarly, tier 2 archive says days after last year change greater than 7 and days after creation greater than 30. Filters have been mentioned as blob type is block blob and prefix match is container 1. Let's now look at the questions. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. And your first statement is a blob snapshot automatically moves to the cool access tier after 15 days. Focus on actions section and you will only see actions defined for version but nothing for snapshots. So the statement is incorrect, as the statement is talking about snapshots, but you have nothing in actions for a snapshot. You just have things for version. Let's look at next statement. A blob version in container 2 automatically moves to the archive access tier after 30 days. For this case, focus on prefix match, and this lifecycle management is applicable to container 1 only. So again, an incorrect statement. Let's look at third statement. A rehydrated version is in container 1 automatically moves to the archive access tier after 30 days. This one is a bit complicated as rehydrated versions keep their original creation date and rule of tier to archive still apply, and it will be moved instantly back to archive tier. So again, an incorrect choice. Folks, I am now on Microsoft official documentation page, which tells us about blob rehydration process from archive tier. It is very important that you should be across this process, as this was the main thing to rule out statement 3 as an incorrect option. Let's read through it. Microsoft recommends performing a copy operation in most scenarios where you need to move a blob from archive tier to an online tier for the following reasons. A copy operation avoids the early deletion fee that is accessed if you change the tier of a blob from archive tier before the required 180-day period elapses. This was not critical in answering the question. What was critical is the next statement. If there's a lifecycle management policy in effect for the storage account, then rehydrating a blob with set blob tier can result in a scenario where the lifecycle policy moves the blob back to the archive tier after rehydration because the last modified time is beyond the threshold set for the policy, which is exactly what is being talked about in this question. That is why it is moved back to archive tier. Question number 162 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual network shown in the following table. You have two virtual networks with the name of VNet 1 and VNet 2. VNet 1 is hosted in West US location and VNet 2 is hosted in Central Europe. You need to ensure that all the traffic between VNet 1 and VNet 2 traverses the Microsoft backbone network. What should you configure? Your options are private endpoint, peering, express route, route table. And you should configure peering in this case. As you can see on this Microsoft documentation regarding virtual network peering enables you to seamlessly connect two or more virtual networks in Azure. The virtual networks appear as one for connectivity purposes. The traffic between virtual net machines is in peered virtual networks uses the Microsoft backbone infrastructure. Like traffic between virtual machines in the same network, traffic is routed through Microsoft's private network only. Now, Azure supports basically two types of peering, which is virtual network peering and global virtual network peering, but we will not go into the detail of these types because they are out of the scope for this question. Now, the other options, private endpoints are used to access Azure services over a private connection. Express route is used for connecting on-prem to Azure over a dedicated private connection, and route tables are used to control the flow of network traffic within a subnet or a virtual network in Azure. You have an Azure subscription and you are creating a new Azure container instance that will have the following settings. Container name is cont1, SKU is standard, OS type is Windows, networking type is public, memory GIB is 2.5, number of CPU cores is 2. You discover that the private setting for networking type is unavailable. You need to ensure that cont1 can be configured to use private networking. Which setting should you change? Your options are memory, GIB, networking type, number of CPU cores, OS types, or SKU. In the option mentioned, it's mentioned that the networking type is currently set to public. Changing it to private will do the job. It will allow the container to use private networking instead of public networking. This change ensures that the container instance is not directly accessible from the internet and can only communicate with the private network. Folks, we are now in Azure portal and we will try to create a container and see these settings by ourselves. You can see I am in the networking settings and you get three options. Basically, you can choose networking type as public, private, or none. Public will create a public IP address for your container instance. Private will allow you to choose a new or existing virtual network for your container instance. So basically, Private will allow you to either you can choose your existing virtual network. Let's say you have a virtual network for your instances, you can use that as well, or you can even create a new virtual network to isolate things. None will not create either a public IP or virtual network. You will still be able to access your container logs using the command line. So folks, these are the three options that are available to you, and based on the requirement given in the question about private networking, you will choose networking type as private. Basically, it is not explicitly said in in the options given which type of networking you will choose, but option B is just focusing on networking type. So you just need to be aware that changing the networking type will make sure that you can use private networking in this case. This is question number 164. You have an Azure subscription that contains multiple virtual machines in the West US Azure region. You need to use traffic analytics in Azure Network Watcher to monitor virtual network traffic. Which two resources should you create? Your options are Log Analytics Workspace, Azure Monitor Workbook, Storage Account, Microsoft Sentinel Workspace, Data Collection Rule DCR in Azure Monitor. To use traffic analytics in Azure Network Watcher, you need to create a Log Analytics Workspace and a storage account. A Log Analytics Workspace is a cloud-based repository that collects and stores data from various sources such as NSG flow logs. A storage account is a container that provides a unique namespace to store and access your data objects in Azure storage. So folks, I now hope that you understand why these two options have been chosen as the correct answer. But if you still have any doubts in any of the questions in this video, please post your doubts in the comments section. This is question number 165 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure container registry named contreg1. You enable the admin user for contreg1. Which username can you use to sign into contreg1? Your options are root, admin, administrator, contreg1. Your admin username will be contreg1 in this case. Folks, let's head to Azure portal to create a container registry and check this in real time. Okay, folks, so we are now in Azure portal. Let's try to create a container registry first, and then let's see the admin username. So just select one of the resource group that's available in the registry name. Let's put something which is not available and let's create it. It's running some validations, which should return as good. Yeah, validation is passed. Let's create it. So the deployment is currently in progress. It should be created in just few seconds. Okay, our container registry contreg176746 is now created. Obviously, I had to choose this name because contreg1 was not available due to obvious reasons. Let's go to access keys, and here you can see if you want to enable the admin user, you need to checkbox this checkbox, and basically there you have a message. It says if activated, you can use this registry name as username. So for example, in the question, if the registry name was something else, then username would have been something else. And yeah, this is basically what I wanted to convey to you. Whatever is your registry name is your admin user. Let's try to click on it. And you can see in the username, it's showing contreg176746, and it's displaying the passwords. It has two passwords, so you don't really need to worry about these passwords at this point. This is question number 166. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account shown in the following table. You have 4 storage accounts named storage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then their kinds are defined and their performance tiers are defined, and which type of replications they use and which is the access tier that is applicable to you. So storage 1 doesn't have any access tier applicable to it, whereas storage 2 has cool tier and storage 3 and 4 are belonging to hot tier. The storage 1 is storage general purpose V1, whereas storage 2 and storage 3 are storage V2, general purpose V2, and storage 4 is blob storage. The performance of storage 1 and storage 4 is categorized as premium, whereas performance of storage 2 and storage 3 is categorized as standard. And the replication type for three storages, which is storage 1, 2, and 4, is locally redundant storage. And the replication for storage 3 is read access geo-redundant storage, which is RAGRS. Now you need to tell which storage account can be converted to zone redundant storage, which is ZRS replication. Folks, key to answer this question is the storage account needs to be converted to ZRS replication. To understand this, let's head to official Microsoft documentation and see which all factors we need to take into consideration while answering this question. So folks, this is the Microsoft documentation page, which tells you details about how a storage account is replicated and how it can be changed. So let's scroll to the bottom of this page, as there is a table which will give us a bit of detail around what we are trying to achieve in this question. So here it says the following table provides an overview of redundancy options available for storage account types and whether conversion and manual migration are supported. Remember, we are trying to convert to ZRS replication. So ZRS, this is the option, support ZRS, and you can see here standard general purpose V1 does not have a tick, which means standard. If there is a storage kind standard general purpose V1, then it cannot be converted to support ZRS. So that means you can rule out option A here, which is storage 1. Then folks, it doesn't have any references to blob storage. That means storage 4 can also be ruled out because storage 4 was blob storage. Now we are left with option B and option C, which are storage 2 and storage 3. Let's scroll through this page to another set of instruction which will help us in clarifying and eliminating the other option. Yep, so this is the table I was talking about. The following table provides an overview of how to switch from each type of replication to another. The first column of the table shows you are switching from which type of storage replication and switching to which type of storage replication. So you are now switching from, so the two options that are remaining are storage 2 and storage 3. Storage 2 is using locally redundant storage, whereas storage 3 is using RAGRS. So storage 2, which was LRS, you need to switch from LRS to GRS. And you can see it says perform a conversion. That means the conversion is possible. Now, storage 3 was read access geo-redundant storage, which is RAGRS. And for that, to migrate or to convert to ZRS, it says switch to LRS first, then perform a conversion to ZRS. That means it's not a direct conversion, and we will rule out storage 3 and mark storage 2 as the correct choice here. So friends, I now hope you understand why storage 2 has been chosen as the correct choice here based on all the documentation I showed you, and what are the reasons why we have eliminated storage 1, storage 3, and storage 4 here. But if you still have any doubts, please post them in the comment section. Let's look at question number 167. You have an Azure subscription that contains the virtual machines shown in the following table. You have 3 virtual machines named VM1, VM2, VM3, which are located in West Europe, East US, West US. VM1 has 8 virtual CPUs, VM2 has 2 virtual CPUs, VM3 has 12 virtual CPUs. And the generation of VM1 is generation 2, and VM2 and VM3 are first generation VMs. You create an Azure Compute Gallery named Compute Gallery 1 as shown in the Azure Compute Gallery exhibit below. There is an exhibit on your screen. Obviously, you can ignore the subscription. The resource group again can be ignored as they are personal to me. The region is West Europe. The name of the Compute Gallery is Compute Gallery 1. Soft delete is disabled, and I do not have any description. Let's look at next part of the question. In Compute Gallery 1, you create a virtual machine image definition named image 1 as shown in the exhibit on the right hand side of the screen. Go through the exhibit and then you have some statements and you need to tell whether these statements are right or wrong. So let's first go through the exhibit. The VM image definition region is East US. Again, the target Azure Compute Gallery is Compute Gallery 1. Definition name is image 1. OS type is Windows. Security type is a standard. And you can see VM generation is mentioned as V1, which is first generation. This is one of the critical factors that you will have to take into consideration while answering the questions going forward. The VM architecture is x64, which is 64-bit. Publisher is Contoso, offer is Windows Server 2022, and SKU is Data Center. Now, in the publishing options, most of the options are none, but you need to take into consideration the recommended VM CPUs, which is 4 to 16, and recommended VM memory, which is 1 to 32 GB. Now, the first statement is the operating system disk of VM1 can be used as a source for a version of image 1. Look at the VM generation in the screenshot and it says V1, which means it supports generation 1 images. However, VM1 is a generation 2, so an incorrect statement. Let's look at second statement. The operating system disk of VM2 can be used as a source for a version of image 1. The statement is correct, as both VM generation and the one in VM definition match. Also, the VM definition and source region match. That is why I was telling you that you need to focus on the values selected in the VM image definition and when creating the compute gallery. Let's look at statement 3. The operating system disk of VM1 can be used as a source for a version of image 1. For this one, you should notice that region in VM definition is different than VM source, so an incorrect statement. The operating system disk of VM1 cannot be used as a source for a version of image 1. Let's look at next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains the container images shown in the following table. You have two images, image 1 and image 2. Image 1 uses Windows Server as its operating system and image 2 uses Linux. You plan to use the following services and your services are Azure Container Instances, Azure Container Apps, Azure App Service. In which services can you run the images? And the first one is regarding image 1. And your options are Azure Container Instance only, Azure Container Apps only, Azure Container Instances and App Services only, Azure Container Apps and App Services only, Azure Container Instances, Azure Container Apps, and App Services, which is all three options. Folks, let's head to Microsoft documentation of all the services to answer this. Okay, so the first one is the documentation related to Azure Container Instances. Let's scroll down and here you can see Azure Container Instances can schedule both Windows and Linux containers with the same API. You can specify your OS type preference when you create your container groups. That means whether it is image 1 or image 2, because both of them have a different operating system, you can run these images in Azure Container Instances. Let's now look at Azure Container Apps. So this is again the documentation regarding the Azure Container Apps, and you can see Azure Container App supports any Linux-based x86 and 64 container image with no required base image. Containers from any public or private container registry, sidecar, and init containers. You would notice that there is no mention about Windows images. That means the Azure Container Apps do not support Windows images, so which means you cannot use image 1 here. That means for the first question, which was corresponding to image 1, you will not have Azure Container Apps in the valid choices. Let's now look at Azure App Services. Okay, so for Azure App Services, as you can see, Azure App Service is a HTTP-based service for hosting web application, REST APIs, and mobile backends. You can develop in your favorite language, be it .NET, .NET Core, Java, Node.js, PHP, and Python. Applications run and scale with ease on both Windows and Linux-based environments. That means you can run image 1 and image 2 in Azure App Service. So folks, based on the documentation which we just went through, you already know that Azure Container Apps cannot be used for image 1. That means the correct option is Azure Container Instances and App Services only. The next part of this question talks about image 2. So you would already know by it for image 2, because it is a Linux based image, all the three options are valid. That means the fifth option, Azure Container Instances, Azure Container Apps, and App Services are the valid choice in this case. Question number 169. You have a Microsoft Entra tenant named DevOpsHub.com. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure App Service web app named App1 and an Azure Key Vault named KV1. KV1 contains a wildcard certificate for DevOpsHub.com. You have a user named user1 at DevOpsHub.com that is assigned the owner role for App1 and KV1. You need to configure App1 to use the wildcard certificate of KV1. What should you do first? Your options are assign a managed user entity to App1, create an access policy for KV1 and assign the Microsoft Azure App Service principal to the policy, create an access policy for KV1 and assign the policy to user1, configure KV1 to use the role-based access control authorization system. And folks, the correct answer is now on your screen, which is option B, create an access policy for KV1 and assign the Microsoft Azure App Service principal to the policy. You first need to create an access policy in the Azure Key Vault, which is KV1, that allows the app service to access the certificates. Access policies define who can perform certain operations on Key Vault, secrets, keys, and certificates. In this case, you want to grant access to App1. You then assign the policy to the Microsoft Azure App Service principal. After creating the access policy, you should assign it to the Azure App Service principal, not user1. This allows App1 to use the certificate stored in KV1. Assigning a managed user entity to App1, which is option A, and configuring KV1 to use RBAC, which is option D, are not directly related to granting access to the certificate for App1. And option C is incorrect because you should assign the policy to the Azure App Service principal, not user1. Friends, I hope now you understand why option B is correct here and option A, C, and D got eliminated. Question number 170. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to deploy the resources shown in the following table. You have 5 resources, basically IP1, NSG1, VNet1, NIC1, VM1, and their types are defined. Obviously, the first 4 resources are Microsoft.network type, and 5th one being a virtual machine is a compute resource, which is Microsoft.compute. You need to create a single Azure Resource Manager template that will be used to deploy the resources. Which resource should be added to the depends on section for VM1? Your options are VNet1, NIC1, IP1, NSG1. The most direct and crucial dependency for VM1 among the listed resources is NIC1. The NIC acts as a bridge between the VM and other network resources like the virtual network, public IP, and network security group. Therefore, it's essential to ensure that NIC1 is deployed before VM1 is created. Folks, this is one of the tutorial on the Microsoft documentation. As they say in this tutorial, you create a storage account, a virtual machine, a virtual network, and some other dependent resources. Some of the resources cannot be deployed until another resource exists. For example, you can create the virtual machine until you cannot create the virtual machine until its storage account and network interface exists, which is what is asked in the question that we had just now. Network interface is NIC card. You define this relationship by making one resource as dependent on the another resource. As you can see in the diagram on your screen, network interface, which is in short NIC, is at the center of this architecture before a VM can be created. as IP address is assigned to the network interface card, and NIC card is directly linked to virtual network, where NSGs are created to control the flow of the network. So before you can even attempt to create virtual machine, you should ensure that a NIC card is associated to it. So folks, before we look at the next questions in the series, if you are liking the content, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe the channel. Also share the video with your fellow associates who are preparing for Azure Administrator exam. This is question number 171 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains a resource group named RG1. You plan to create a storage account named storage1. You have a Bicep file named file1. You need to modify file1 so that it can be used to automate the deployment of storage1 to RG1. Which property should you modify? Your options are kind, scope, SKU, location. You can automate the deployment of storage1 to RG1 if the scope is defined. So here I'm on the documentation to understand the structure and syntax of Bicep file so that you know why scope was chosen as the correct answer here. If you scroll down, you can see target scope. By default, the target scope is set to resource group. If you are deploying at the resource group level, you don't need to set the target scope in your Bicep file. The allowed values are resource group, which is what we are trying to do here. It is a default value used for resource group deployments. Then you can have subscription in the values, which is used for subscription deployment. Then you can also have management group as the allowed value, which is used for management group deployments. And then the last one option, allowed option, is tenant, used for tenant deployments. Folks, basically, you can use a Bicep to deploy at any of the hierarchy level in Azure. If you do not know about the different levels of hierarchy, which is management group, subscription, or resource group, I already have a detailed video around the hierarchies in Azure. Do not forget to check that out to understand the hierarchy in more detail. This is question number 172. You have an Azure subscription that contains a storage account named storage1. The storage1 account contains a container named container1. You need to configure access to container1, and the solution must meet the following requirements. Only allow read access, allow both HTTP and HTTPS protocols, apply access permissions to all the content in the container. What should you use? Your options are an access policy, a shared access signature, Azure Content Delivery Network, and access keys. Folks, for fulfilling the listed requirement, you should use shared access signature. A shared access signature provides a way to delegate access to resources in your storage account, including specific permissions such as read access protocols, which are HTTP and HTTPS, and constraints. By generating a SAS for your container, you can control and limit the access to the container based on your requirements. Folks, that's all I wanted to cover in this part of the series, but there will be more parts released soon, so stay tuned.